They tried to erase her identity with a single decision. Now the entire city is watching her return. What will happen when the doors that once closed in her face open back up? Let us know in the comments section below. Megan Hines stood still in the middle of the hallway, jaw tight, her fingers curled around the strap of her worn backpack. Her dreadlocks, long and proud, rested like a crown over her shoulders, swaying gently each time she shifted her weight. She wasn't late. She was never late. But she knew the moment she walked into that office, something was going to change, and not in her favor. "Miss Hines." The secretary's voice was clipped and cold. "Principal Whitmore will see you now." Megan didn't answer. She simply stepped forward. Every inch of this private school reeked of something polished but artificial, the kind of place that smiled at your face while deciding how to fold you into its mold, or cast you out completely. She'd only been enrolled at Larchmont Academy for 3 weeks, but those weeks were enough. Enough to see the stares, the whispers. Enough to feel the weight of eyes following her every move, not because she was loud or disruptive. Megan barely spoke in class, but because her hair refused to lie flat and obedient. Principal Nancy Whitmore didn't bother standing when Megan entered. She sat behind her mahogany desk, her posture stiff, her hands folded like she was preparing to deliver a sermon. Megan stood silently in front of the desk, the way she'd seen kids do in detention scenes on TV, except she wasn't here because of a fight, or cheating, or skipping class. Nancy Whitmore finally spoke. "Megan, we've reviewed your appearance policy violations with the school board." Megan blinked once. "Appearance policy?" "Correct," Whitmore replied, her voice calm but firm. "The board has determined that your current hairstyle violates our grooming standards. You've been informed of this before." Megan stayed still, her jaw tightened. "You'll need to cut them," Whitmore continued, "or, I'm afraid, we won't be able to allow you to continue attending Larchmont." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was thick, dense. It dared Megan to fold. But she didn't. She hadn't asked for this moment, but she wasn't going to run from it either. "My hair's clean," Megan said slowly. "It's not a distraction to anyone. It's mine. This is how it grows, how I wear it. My mom does it herself." Whitmore leaned forward, clasping her hands a little tighter. "It's not about cleanliness, Megan. It's about uniformity, standards. Larchmont holds itself to a certain image. An image that doesn't include me?" The question landed like a slap across the desk, but Whitmore didn't flinch. "We have standards for all students. This isn't personal." It was, though. It was deeply personal. Later that day, Megan would walk out of the front gates of Larchmont with her mother beside her, both of them silent and stiff, her mom's arm wrapped tight around her shoulder, like she was trying to hold her together before she cracked. They didn't cry until they were home, and even then only for a moment, because something shifted that day, not just in Megan, but in how her mother looked at her. "We're gonna make them remember your name," Denise Hines had whispered, "every single one of them." The next few years moved like a storm, but Megan moved faster. She refused to be invisible, not again. At just 17, she finished high school early through a dual enrollment program at the local community college. By 19, she was speaking at education conferences. At 21, she launched her first nonprofit, focused on student rights and school policy reform. But even with every accolade, every article, every award, the memory of that office, that woman, never left her. She used to dream of walking back in with cameras behind her, of holding the school's handbook in one hand and shredding it with the other. She didn't dream anymore. She planned. Years passed, faces changed, administrators rotated, but one thing remained constant. Megan never forgot. Now, as the newly appointed superintendent of the entire school district, including Larchmont, Megan Hines sat quietly in her car, parked across the street from the same campus that once expelled her for refusing to cut her dreadlocks. A light drizzle tapped on the windshield, but she didn't move. In the rearview mirror, her reflection stared back at her. Older, sharper, steady. Her locks were longer now, beautifully maintained, not a strand out of place. But it wasn't vanity that kept them. It was memory, it was protest, it was victory braided in every twist. Her phone buzzed. A text from Ava. Boardroom ready. Let's make history. Megan exhaled through her nose, then opened the door. She stepped out slowly, not because she was unsure, but because she wanted to feel every second of this walk. Her heels clicked against the pavement like punctuation, each step a reminder. She was no longer the girl standing before a principal's desk. She was the desk. The building was still the same, red brick, ivy-covered, too proud for its own good. But Megan had changed, and so had the world. As she pushed the front doors open, staff and students turned to look. This time nobody looked away. And Megan Hines, superintendent, speaker, and the girl they once tried to erase, smiled without saying a word. She was back, and they would never forget her again. Back when Megan was just 13, she believed school was where smart girls went to grow. She had this vision, her in a lab coat, standing in front of a chalkboard, changing the world with a marker and an idea. But when Larchmont expelled her, that vision cracked. It wasn't just about hair. It was about how a place built to shape young minds decided hers didn't fit the mold. People talked about it for weeks, some with sympathy, most with silence. Even the local paper buried the story in the community column, calling it a dress code dispute, like her entire identity was some fashion statement. But Megan remembered who did speak up. There was Ava Thompson, her best friend since 5th grade, the only girl who stood beside her when she walked out of those gates. Ava didn't say anything grand that day. She just linked arms with Megan and walked, too. That silence said everything. It was Ava who first brought up the idea of fighting back, not just for Megan, but for every student whose name wasn't printed on the school's donation plaques. They didn't have money or power, but they had eyes, and smartphones, and anger. Together, they started a blog. Simple at first, Megan wrote about her experience. Ava added stats, quotes, stories from other kids who messaged them. Within a week, the site had over 10,000 hits. Within a month, they were on the local news. "We didn't plan to become activists," Megan told a reporter once. "We just refused to disappear." What followed was a blur of speaking gigs, press interviews, public panels. But Megan never let it get to her head. She still lived with her mom, still studied at night, still braided her little cousin's hair on Sundays. What did change was the way people looked at her when she spoke. Not like a child anymore, but like someone with fire in her throat and purpose in her bones. It was Ava who found the first scholarship, a national award for education equity. Megan applied without thinking she'd get it. Then she won. And everything changed. She packed her bags for D.C., stayed in dorms with girls who read James Baldwin like gospel, who quoted Angela Davis over breakfast, who saw the world not for what it was, but what it could become. She soaked it all in, took notes like her life depended on it. But no matter how far she traveled, Megan kept one photo with her. Her sitting on the front steps of Larchmont, arms crossed, hair wild and defiant, with Ava beside her flipping the camera off. They were kids, but the moment was real. Now back in her hometown, Megan walked the halls of the district headquarters like she belonged. Because she did. The office space was beige and boring, like most government buildings. But the agenda she carried? Anything but. She passed by the portraits on the wall. Old white men in suits with smug smiles. Superintendents who came before her. None looked like her. None were her. Her first meeting was with the board. They called it a welcome briefing. Megan called it a test. The room was cold, the kind of cold that didn't come from the AC but from the people inside it. David Ellis, longtime board member, gave her the kind of smile that didn't touch his eyes. "So," he said, flipping through her file, "you're the youngest superintendent we've ever had, and the first, well..." He didn't finish the sentence, but Megan knew what he meant. "First one with dreadlocks?" she asked, her tone dry. He chuckled like she'd made a joke. "I was going to say community advocate, but sure." The others laughed politely, shifting in their chairs. Megan didn't blink. "I'm also the first one who used to be a student in this district." That shut them up. She laid her folder on the table and pulled out a document. "This is my first policy proposal. I'll be presenting it next week." Ellis glanced at it, his brows lifting. "A grooming anti-discrimination policy?" "Yes," Megan said. "District-wide. No student will be punished, isolated, or removed for the way they wear their natural hair. Period." Another board member, a woman named Susan, frowned. "Is this based on a personal experience?" Megan nodded. "Deeply personal and widely shared. We've had 8 complaints in the last 2 years alone. Braids, twists, afros, even do-rags on Spirit Day." "That's not exactly a crisis," Ellis muttered. "It's not a crisis to you," Megan said, voice steady, "because your hair never got you kicked out of class." He opened his mouth to respond, but Megan was already sliding another document across the table. "This is a list of policies in other districts, along with their impact stats. You'll find attendance improved, suspension rates dropped, school morale increased. In one case, even test scores rose because students felt safer." Silence filled the room. She let it sit. "I'm not asking for permission," she said finally. "I'm informing you." It was Ava who waited for her in the parking lot afterward, leaning against the hood of her car like an unbothered queen. "You do it?" she asked. "Presented it. They gonna fight it?" "Probably." Ava handed her a smoothie, no words, just the way she always had Megan's back. "You need to stop looking so surprised every time they underestimate you." Megan laughed, sipping. "They never stop, do they?" "No," Ava said, "but neither do you." That night, Megan went home and pulled a dusty binder from her closet, the one where she kept every note, headline, article, email. It was thick now. Her mom had insisted she save it all. So she did. She flipped to the very first page. A letter she wrote but never sent, addressed to Principal Whitmore. In it, Megan had begged, not to be right, not to win, just to stay. She read it once, then quietly tore it out. She didn't need it anymore, because tomorrow she was scheduled to visit Larchmont, not as a guest, but as its new leader. And Principal Whitmore? She was still there. The battle Megan started as a kid wasn't over. It was just now entering the room where decisions were made. And this time, she had the mic. Nancy Whitmore sat at the edge of her desk, hands folded tightly in her lap, eyes fixed on the clock above the whiteboard. The minutes ticked by too slowly, like they were dragging her towards something she couldn't stop. Her office hadn't changed in over a decade. Same polished wood floors, same dark green walls, same bookshelves with untouched copies of policy binders. Only one thing felt different now. She wasn't sure this room belonged to her anymore. When the knock came, it wasn't timid. It was sharp, precise. Nancy stood, smoothing down the front of her blazer before opening the door herself. There stood Megan Hines. The girl, no, the woman, she had expelled 10 years ago now, stood with a district badge around her neck and calm in her posture. Nancy felt her throat tighten. Superintendent Hines. Megan's expression didn't waver. Whitmore? The room felt smaller when they both stepped inside. Megan didn't sit. She remained standing, eyes scanning the space briefly, pausing on the corner of the desk where she had once stood as a teenager, too stunned to speak as her education was stripped away. "I wanted to visit each school this week," Megan began, her tone measured. Start with where my work began? Nancy gestured stiffly. Would you like to sit? Megan shook her head. No, I don't plan to stay long. Nancy swallowed, moving to perch on the edge of her desk again. She tried to hold Megan's gaze, but found herself looking past her instead, out the window. Quite the journey you've had, she said finally, reaching for small talk like it could mask everything else. We've all read about it. National coverage, awards, impressive. I didn't come here for compliments, Megan replied. Nancy shifted uncomfortably. I assumed as much. The silence between them buzzed. Megan stepped closer, not threateningly but with presence. I was 13 when I sat in this room, and you told me my hair was unfit for your school. You called it a disruption to the learning environment. Nancy sighed, the weight of her own words returning with clarity. That was school policy at the time. No, Megan said, her voice clear. That was your policy. There was no venom in her tone, just truth, and somehow that stung more. Nancy reached for something, anything to say. It wasn't personal. It was never anything but personal, Megan said. The memory returned in pieces. Megan standing there in her uniform, straight posture, calm face, hair thick and coiled in proud locks. She hadn't cried, not once. She had just looked straight ahead, even as Nancy had spoken to her like she was a problem to be managed, not a child to be taught. I came back, Megan continued, not for revenge, not even for closure. I came back to make sure no other student has to sit in this office and feel like they don't belong in their own skin. Nancy folded her hands tighter. You've made your point, Megan. I'm not making a point, Megan replied. I'm building policy, and you're going to implement it. Nancy's brow twitched. You telling me how to run my school? I'm telling you how we run our schools, Megan said. This district, this community, this future, and it starts by unlearning what you believed was normal. Nancy didn't respond. She couldn't. Because part of her knew Megan wasn't wrong. Outside the office, the bell rang, and students flowed into the hallway in a wave of backpacks, sneakers, and laughter. Megan turned her head slightly, watching through the glass. A girl passed by. 7th grade, maybe. Her skin a warm brown, her hair pulled into 2 neat puffs, edges laid down with care. She smiled at a friend, completely unaware of the quiet war taking place just feet away from her. That could have been me, Megan said softly, if someone had chosen differently. Nancy looked at the floor. You still have influence here, Megan added. Use it. Retire if you can't. But you won't be allowed to shrink behind policies that hurt kids anymore. The door creaked open slightly, and Ava stepped in, tablet in hand. Sorry to interrupt, she said, though she didn't sound sorry at all. District meetings in 20, room B14. Megan nodded, then looked back at Nancy one final time. This conversation isn't about shame, it's about accountability. Nancy didn't answer. As Megan stepped out into the hallway, Ava walked beside her. You okay? I'm better than I've ever been. Ava chuckled. She looked like she saw a ghost. She did, Megan said. The girl she tried to erase came back and told her what's next. As they made their way down the hall, teachers peeked from classrooms. Some smiled, a few nodded subtly. Megan noticed but didn't react. This wasn't about applause. Inside room B14, the district team was already setting up, charts, screens, slides. The air buzzed with a quiet tension. Megan stood at the head of the table. I want every school under our leadership to know this. Cultural identity is not a dress code violation. It's not a disruption. It's not negotiable. She clicked the first slide, a list of student photos, each one expelled, suspended, or disciplined for hair reasons across the district in the last decade. One face stood out. Her own. I'm here because nobody stopped it back then, Megan said, but I'm here now to make sure we stop it today. The room was still. Then a voice from the back. One of the younger staff members raised a hand. "How do we support this at the classroom level?" Megan smiled. It was the first real one all day. By changing the rules and changing ourselves. Later that evening, Megan sat alone in the library of the district building, flipping through old yearbooks from Larchmont. The musty pages held pictures of traditions she was never invited to join, clubs she was asked not to apply for, photos where her face never appeared. She reached the last page. There, taped in, was a note. In her own handwriting. "Someday I'll come back here, not to fit in, to lead." She stared at it for a long time, then tucked it back into the page and closed the book. Tomorrow the policy would go live. Press would be there, families would show up, hair in curls, coils, braids, buzz cuts, scarves, silk wraps. Everything they tried to hide would finally be seen. And the world, it would watch. But Megan, she would stand. Not for herself, but for every kid walking into a classroom right now, wondering if who they are is too much for the world to handle. Because Megan had learned something Nancy Whitmore never understood. When the world finally looks you in the eyes, you better not blink. The morning sun crept over the school grounds, casting soft gold light across the red brick face of Larchmont Academy. Students arrived in clusters, some dragging backpacks, others moving with the ease of routine. Today something felt different. Not louder, but lighter. Whispers moved like wind through the crowd, carried between students and teachers alike. There were signs at the entrance, big ones, with clean, white lettering and the school's crest at the top. Today, library dedication ceremony, 10 o'clock a.m. Most kids barely glanced at it, but the faculty, the alumni, the media crews, all of them had their eyes wide open. Inside, Megan Hines stood at the front of the library, her hands resting on the podium as the finishing touches were made. Rows of chairs were already filling with faces, some familiar, some curious. A few people she hadn't seen since the day she left this school. Denise Hines sat in the front row, a proud calm on her face. Her hands clutched the program, her name listed as the guest of honor, but her eyes were fixed only on her daughter. Behind Megan, draped with a deep navy cloth, hung the plaque. No one had seen it yet. Not the media, not the teachers, not even Denise. Only Ava had seen the final wording. She'd helped Megan pick the font, double-check the spelling. Still, even she kept glancing at it like it might reveal itself early. Megan cleared her throat. People quieted. A hush swept over the room. "I want to thank all of you for being here today," Megan began, her voice steady, her presence rooted like a tree. "This space holds memories for many, but for me, it used to hold none." A few heads turned, unsure how to interpret that. Megan smiled gently. "I never made it far enough to leave my mark here. I was removed before I could build those memories, but today, that changes. Not just for me, but for every student who's ever felt invisible inside walls that were supposed to lift them up." She paused, letting that sink in. Behind her, the librarian, Mrs. Owens, who had been quiet support when Megan was still a student, nodded slowly, her eyes misting. Megan continued. "I was 13 when I was expelled from Larchmont for refusing to cut my dreadlocks. At the time, I thought it was just about hair. Now, I know it was about something bigger." A stillness settled in the room. "It was about belonging," she said, "and about the systems that get to decide who does and who doesn't." She stepped back, nodding toward Ava. Ava stepped forward, gripping the edge of the navy cloth. She looked toward Megan once more, received a small nod, and then pulled the fabric down. There it was. The Loretta Green Memorial Library, in honor of the woman who taught us to read ourselves before the world tried to rewrite us. Dedicated by Superintendent Megan Hines. Gasps echoed, Hands clapped instinctively. Denise covered her mouth. Tears welled up behind her eyes before she could blink them away. Megan turned to her. "She taught me to be proud of where I came from," Megan said. "She gave me books that looked like me, talked like me, sounded like home. And when the world tried to tell me I didn't fit, her voice told me I already belonged." Denise rose to her feet. The applause grew. People weren't just clapping for a new name on a building. They were clapping because they saw it. The full circle, the pain rewritten, the justice done not through anger but through legacy. Megan stepped down from the podium and wrapped her arms around her mother. They held each other tight, neither of them speaking, both knowing what this moment meant. Students leaned over each other to read the plaque. A few pulled out their phones to snap pictures. One of them, a boy with short braids and glasses, whispered to his friend, "She's the reason I didn't cut mine when they told me to." Outside the library, the district photographer snapped official portraits. Megan stood between her team and school officials, smiling with purpose. Ava elbowed her lightly. "You sure you're not going to cry?" she whispered. "I might. Later." "You did it, Meg." "No," Megan said, turning toward the window where students filed in and out of the school. "We did." Back in the hallway, Nancy Whitmore walked slowly toward the library. She had attended the ceremony sitting in the back row, her hands folded in her lap the entire time. She hadn't applauded. She hadn't needed to. She had listened. And that was something. As she reached the plaque, she stopped. She read it twice, then reached out and placed a hand gently against the cool metal. Behind her, Megan approached. "I didn't think you'd come," Megan said. Nancy didn't look away from the plaque. "I had to." There was silence between them. But it wasn't like before. This one was easier, less sharp. "You were right," Nancy said, voice softer than Megan had ever heard it. "I didn't see what I should have seen, and for that, I'm sorry." Megan didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "I didn't come here for your apology." "I know, but I'll take it." Nancy turned then. Her eyes were damp, but she didn't hide it. "They'll remember you for this. They already do." "I don't need them to remember me," Megan said. "I need them to see the kids coming after me." She turned and walked back toward the crowd, where students were now forming a semicircle around the new plaque, some taking photos, others just staring up in quiet awe. As Megan stood among them, one girl stepped forward. She had dark skin, round cheeks, and waist-length box braids that shimmered as she moved. She couldn't have been older than 12. "My name's Chloe," she said shyly. I think I want to be a teacher when I grow up." Megan smiled. "That's beautiful, Chloe. Do you think I could be a superintendent too?" Megan knelt just slightly so they were eye to eye. "I don't think, Chloe. I know." And just like that, the circle broke into cheers. Someone started chanting Megan's name, and the students picked it up like a beat they all already knew. Outside, the day carried on. Classes resumed. Lunch lines formed. Bells rang. But inside that library, something new had rooted itself, something deeper than bookshelves and plaques. It was the proof that one girl's resistance had bloomed into a movement. That heritage could never be expelled. That hair could hold stories, and that sometimes the best revenge wasn't loud or cruel. It was coming back, stronger, with locks intact, and keys to every door they once slammed shut. Let me know when you're ready for a dynamic intro/hook for the story, a short 2-3 sentence summary for the description, a thumbnail concept, the thumbnail text, all designed to grab attention, match the tone, and drive engagement. Yusette, who was the one insulting her dreadlocks. ChatGPT said, "Great question. The person who enforced and stood by the decision that Megan's dreadlocks violated the school's appearance policy, effectively leading to her expulsion, was Principal Nancy Whitmore. While Nancy never explicitly insulted the Dreadlocks with cruel words in the script, her institutionalized bias came through in the way she framed the policy. She used terms like, "violates our grooming standards. We have standards for all students. It's about uniformity and image." These phrases, delivered under the mask of professionalism, carried the sting of judgment. It wasn't a direct insult. It was something worse, a cold dismissal of Megan's identity, wrapped in policy and rules. That's the kind of racism the story calls out, not always loud and angry, but quiet, polished, and deeply damaging. Want me to write a flashback scene where the discrimination is more direct, maybe from a teacher or a student, to intensify the emotional stakes in a YouTube short version or a teaser?